Hi, good morning. Today we shall be discussing two important issues related to the agrarian and rural society in India. Our discussion pertains to specifically MA program in sociology, the specific course Sociology of Development and Sociology in India. We will be discussing first the agrarian transformation in India. While we will be discussing the agrarian transformation, we also will widen the scope of this discussion specific to going beyond the agrarian social formation, agrarian society. Usually, while we are discussing the agrarian society in India, we keep on discussing also the rural society. But we have to make a distinction between the agrarian society and the rural society. In a rural society that is quite wide enough, and within this rural social framework, we find different kind of social group interacting with each other with different kind of a social, economic and political formation. But in agrarian society, that is also part of a rural society. Here we specifically engage ourselves with the discussion on the agrarian framework, the people within which people specifically engaging themselves with the agrarian social activities. By doing so, let us come to this point, that is, when we are talking about rural, what do we mean by rural and what do we mean by agrarian? When we are talking about the rural, we are talking about a category of a society, those which are not urban. So first we have to define urban, then we have to go beyond what is not urban. When we talk about urban, we talk about in terms of a minimum population concentration of 5,000 in a given space, and population concentration ratio would be to the extent of 400 people per square kilometer, and 75% of the male workers will be engaged in non-agricultural occupation, and simultaneously there will be availability of modern and civic amenities. By saying so, what I am talking about, when we are talking about a rural society, we are talking about a society where the population concentration is not up to 5,000 in a given area, and population concentration is not to the extent of 400 population per square kilometer, and also here more than 75% of the people are not engaged in non-agricultural activities. And also simultaneously we will have to understand that modern amenities by which we mean the modern road, the transport, the hospital, schools, colleges, universities, those are not available to the extent with the density which is required for this population. So the way rural is defined, keep in mind rural is defined vis-a-vis a category that is urban. In our country now, we are having roughly around 6,50,000 villages, and that is considered to be the rural villages in India, and around 68.84% of our population live to the rural areas. So this is a wider scope of the rural areas. Now let us go one step further. When we will be talking about rural transformation, obviously we will be talking about the transformation at a faster rate, at a quantum change in the areas of the economic, social and political activities, social, economic and political arena of the society. So we will be taking cognizance of the economic arrangement, that is the organization of production, socio-cultural framework, we will be talking about the caste, ethnicity, race, and also political arrangement starting from the local bodies, the panchayat, then we are going one step up, that is the state assembly, then we are going beyond, that is we are talking about the parliamentary. So all these political processes are involved part of the rural society. But when we are talking about the agrarian society, we are specifically talking about the category of the people, those are specifically meant in terms of the ownership, control and use of land. So keep in mind, we are talking about the agrarian social structure, a network of social relationship that is evolved based on the ownership, control and use of land. Well, when you are talking about the agrarian social structure, also it's having own organization of production, that is totally dependent on land, while the rural social structure may not be totally dependent on land. It is household industry may be one, there may be non-agricultural may be another. So it is a combination of other activities that gives the foundation of a rural society and agrarian society quite specific. Now come to this point, the organization of production in agrarian society is simply land, and its political arrangement is totally dependent on ownership, manage and control of the land. So land is the main connotation, concern for an agrarian society. So when we are talking the rural and also the agrarian society, they are equally influenced by the local, the village, town, city, national and the global connectivity. So combination, what we are talking about, widely influences each other. So when we are talking about the economic framework, cultural framework, or the social framework, we have to keep in mind that those are not independent. They keep on intersecting with each other. So intersectionality with the caste, class, ethnicity, agrarian categories widely overlapping, and that influences the status, role and mobility of the social group in a society. Let us go one step further. When we are talking about the rural social structure, within the rural social structure, we find that the organized social group, those are the empirical social group. By empirical means you can see them in their eyes, you can see their existence through their action and activities. And those empirical social groups are quite primordial, and they are inherited and continuing in the agrarian society. One of the social categories are the Varna and the Jati, that is the caste and the Varna system. So when we are talking about the caste system, we are talking a social arrangement that is based on the ritual hierarchy, practice of purity and pollution, the traditional division of labor, that is called occupational hierarchy. Also we are having the practice of endogamy, that is no caste can marry outside own caste. There is also practice of gotro exogamy, that is nobody can marry within the own gotra. So these are the some of the characteristics through which a caste operate in a rural society. So these are the social categories that is founded, that gives the foundation of rural society. Simultaneously in the rural society, we also find the interrelationship between varieties of social groups, varieties of the religious group. Some of the religious group, they are born with the indigenous religion, Hinduism, Jainism. We talk about the enormous variety of the indigenous tribal religion. Those are part of our Indian religious group. Simultaneously, we are also having the religious group like the Christianity and Islam. Those are the religion, and also Zoroastrianism. They came from outside. Gradually, they have been a part of Indian society. So we find a plural fabric of Indian society in terms of the religious formulation, that is multiplicity of the caste, multiplicity of the religious group and multiplicity of the ethnic groups in terms of the language. We can have the varieties of language. As you know, our constitution has recognized roughly around 23 languages. We are having roughly around 1700 dialects spoken in our country. So what we find, enormous proliferation of plurality and plural mosaic of Indian society that is founded on the multiplicity of the caste and varna, then religion, then the ethnicity. But when we are talking about the agrarian society, we are specifically coming to a social category in terms of ownership of the land. So when we are having the ownership of the land, you will find land ownership are not equal. As in earlier cases, so what we find, caste status are not equal. Some of the caste are given the higher status. Brahmin usually get the higher status, followed by the Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, Antaja. So what we find within the each of this caste group, there is enormous varieties of the social group, subcaste. They keep on having their own kind of hierarchy and occupational specialization. Similarly, we find in the agrarian categories, in the agrarian society, a wide variety of economic categories. Those economic categories are not necessarily the empirical category, they are interpretative categories. They are the classes. What are those classes? We can talk about the class of Malik, usually we talk about in terms of the big landowners. They are constructed as the Malik in the rural areas, having a huge amount of the land, and they don't engage themselves in the cultivation of the land. They may be hiring the sharecroppers, the tenant, and subletting the land to the others for the cultivation of the land. Then we are having the medial category of the landowners. They partially may be engaging themselves with the land cultivation and also simultaneously hiring the tenants and the sharecroppers. Then we are having small and marginal cultivators. They are the self-sufficient cultivators. They are the cultivators cultivating themselves by using their own kind of labor, the manual labor, etc. like this. So these categories, the landowners, the medium categories, the kishan, and also what we are talking about, the chota kishan, bada kishan, like this. And within these categories, we find that there is enormous process of mobility, both upward mobility and downward mobility, but those are circumscribed in terms of ownership, control, and use of land. The ownership, control, and use of land has also been widely influenced with the interpenetration of modern technology, that is agricultural technology, that is tractor, thresher, weedicides, pesticides. So varieties of new techniques are coming. So that is also widely influencing the pattern of landholding in our country. Now, below that, we find the peasant cultivator. They are the self-sufficient peasant. They are the people, they usually don't produce for the market. They produce especially for the consumption of the family. They engage themselves with the land by employing their own kind of labor force. They may be, part of them may be the sharecroppers or the tenants. So they are the cultivators. They keep on cultivating the land, either having the ownership, even not having the ownership. Another category in the agrarian society, we find that agricultural laborers. They are the people, they are not having the land. Even they are having the land that may be too minimum size, those land is not sufficient enough to ensure their livelihood security. So what they keep on doing in the rural areas, they keep on selling their labor power, especially to the big landowners, medium landowners, at times to the marginal landowners, small landowners, for ensuring their livelihood security. So what we find, all these categories are not equally arranged, rather unequally arranged in the rural society in terms of the ownership, control, use, and management of the land. Now, also there is another category in the rural areas. There may be the artisans and the craftsmen, there may be the fishermen. So agricultural categories, the agrarian categories, even though they are predominantly related to the land ownership, many of them may be partly landowners. Then artisan may be part landowners. A craftsman may be part landowners. Similarly, the fishermen may be the part landowners of the small landowners. So we find a multiplicity of the categories. Now at this stage, if we like to have a kind of intersectionality between the agrarian categories to that of the conventional social categories of the caste in our society, it has been widely proven by the studies in India. Take the studies of Professor Andre Bete, take the studies of so many other sociologists, those who have engaged themselves with the agrarian studies. What they found, enormous interface between the caste hierarchy and the agrarian class hierarchy. It has so happened, mostly the big landowners and medium landowners, they have come from the higher caste group. The small and the marginal landowners, they predominantly come from the middle caste group. And peasants, sharecroppers, tenant, and agricultural laborer, they have come from the lowest caste background, maybe the other backward classes, the scheduled tribes, and the scheduled caste. So what do you find? The intersectionality between the caste hierarchy and agrarian hierarchy is quite explicit. It was quite explicit in our society during the independent period. Now, what happened post-independent period, we will talk little later. Now, when you talk about the rural society, we also find some of the interactions. Similarly, when we talk about the agrarian society, we find another kind of interaction. But this interaction widely influencing the class and the caste relationship within the society. In rural society, we find enormous interactionality between the great tradition and the little tradition. What is the great tradition? Great tradition are the tradition of those literati, Though are mostly in the urban areas, they're the educated people, they're the cultured people having a lot of cultural resources, cultural capital and social capital. So they're the great tradition widely available across the country, and those tradition, since it is literary, it is written tradition, it is widely available across the country, is available only among the literate people. Then also we are having a folk tradition. The tradition localized one, this is not written, but it is linked to the people's everyday life, everyday kind of interactionality with the local culture. But there is interaction between the local tradition, little tradition and the great tradition. And the interaction between the local tradition and this great tradition has been quite explicit in recent year, when you find many of the folk songs and folk vocabularies are adopted by the Bollywood films, and those are widely used and copied to wide circulation, and you find those local folk tradition musical tune has been universalized. So you find gradual interactionality between the little and great tradition. There is also a process of universalization of certain tradition. There is a parochialization of certain tradition. So what we are talking about, a kind of interactionality which is prevalent in the rural society, and this is also prevalent among the agrarian people. So it is not only rural, it is also as much as agrarian. So in the rural and agrarian society, what we find, especially in the rural society, another two processes of mobility. What we find is Sanskritization. Sanskritization means a process of following the Sanskritic culture by the people, those who in the lower strata of the hierarchy. What is Sanskritic culture? Sanskritic culture, again, the culture of the literati. Sanskrit culture, culture of the upper caste. They follow certain lifestyle, certain attire, certain dress, certain food habit. So when the lower caste follows those kind of attire, habits, moorings, values of the upper caste, gradually they become Sanskritized, and many of them, the lower caste, keep on claiming the status of the higher caste. So that was one of the phenomenon. There is also another phenomenon of the mobility, that is Westernization. That is, many of the people being educated, accepted the Western values of modernity. There is a process of modernization. There is a Western value of Westernization in terms of the Western language, the dress, food habit, culture, attire, etc. like this. So we find a kind of a mobility interaction among the people in terms of Sanskritization and Westernization. Gradually, rural society has also been part of our democratic process. Then we find a process of secularization in the rural society. What is secularization? That is compartmentalizing one life from the primordial identity of the caste, religion and ethnicity. They are asserting themselves in terms of a secular categories, a peasant, agricultural laborer. So even though there is a kind of a caste and religious interface with this, what we find, there is a process of secularization, dissociating one identity from the primordial formation and what they are ultimately aspiring for, aspiring to be citizen, getting the citizenship identity. That is a part of our democratic process that is widely widening the process of reciprocity, accommodation and emotional union with the rural people. That's why we find even in rural society, despite having multiplicity of the religious and ethnic group, common celebration of Holi, common celebration of Deepavali, common celebration of Eid and Durga Puja. So what we find, a kind of interaction that takes place in the rural society, also part of the agrarian society. Even when those class being defined in terms of the ownership, control and use of land. So agrarian society is not devoid of all those kind of influences of the wider social processes and institutional arrangement in the society. As I already talked about, that is agrarian society has also encountered and encountering an enormous process of mobility. How this mobility has hampered with the introduction of new state policies. It is usually talked about till India got independence that India lives in villages, India lives in agriculture. And what we found, that is, when India got independence, roughly around 90% of its workforce was dependent on agriculture. More than 92% of its people are living in the rural areas. When the Britishers came to India, they introduced a permanent settlement to the land, that is 1793. By doing so, what they did, they brought a category of intermediaries in the land holding, that is Jotdar, Jamindars, Talukdars. They become the big landowners in the society, and they become a category of the intermediaries between the actual tiller of the land and the state. So that the intermediary categories. And what by the time India was getting independence, those influence of these intermediary groups became quite predominant, and they become the dominant group, and the other groups in the society, those who are not statistically significant, even socially significant, they become quite prominent in the rural society in terms of their both empirical and statistical strength. Many of the studies shows that before India got independence, land ownership becomes so unequal. Those were the big landowners, those are the intermediary groups, and the peasantry, that those are the Mahaldari system. What they are doing, they are occupying the vast tract of the land, and they are having the huge amount of income. In the process, they took the whole advantage of the insecure social groups, those who are the rural artisans and others, because the British group came, the colonials group came, our artisans, they are not in a position to compete with the Western good, the colonial good. Ultimately, they gave up, and what they do? They become the agricultural laborers. At times, they become the sharecroppers. And to those who are earning more land, earning more money from the land, they also try to have a space to invest in the land. What they started to do, they started purchasing more and more land, giving the people loan at a higher rate of interest. By giving it, they make the people dependent on them. So those who took land and unable to return those money, what they did, they sold off that land to the big landowners, with the condition that they will be cultivating the same piece of land, either as a sharecropper. In Bengal, we call it Bargadar. In other place, the Bataidar, in northern part of the country. And those who are not settled in the land as a Bargadar or Bataidar, many of them become the agricultural laborers. So what we found, that is the agricultural laborers and the tenants, those who were not the social categories, before the arrival, before we got the independence, they were comprising more than 60% of the rural household. So enormous proliferation, and we found a downward mobility of the huge amount of agrarian population, or the upward mobility of the people, those who are having the more economic resources in their hand. So gradually started happening. What happened, that is immediately after independence, the government of India introduced the land reform. Land reform widely talked about restructuring the land ownership pattern in the country, and introduced in 1950s, especially in 1952, and it talked about the 5 pillars of the land reform. Number 1, land ceiling. That is, nobody can have more than 25 acres of land. Gradually it was reduced in 1971. That is, nobody can have more than 17 acres of land. So those who are having the surplus land, those will be taken possession by the state, and these will be distributed among the landless people. So one was the land ceiling, second part was the land distribution. Third important part was the tenurial security, that is the tenurial security of the sharecroppers, bataidars, and the tenants. Those who are having the land from the big landowners to cultivate on a sharecropping system, so they can't be evicted on will by the landowners. So gradually they are given a security, a statutory security to them. And also earlier the division was at the whims of the big landowners. Now the state decided the share of produce will be 60%, it will not be 50%, provided that the landowners are giving other kind of inputs, that is the cost of cultivation, the cost of labor, cost of seed, cost of fertilizer. If they are giving, there will be those kind of security. So we find so far 3, that is land ceiling, land distribution, and third it came tenurial security. Also it talked about the 4th thing, land consolidation. When lands are distributed among the people, so it will be quite difficult to bring the small pieces of land under cultivation by the small landowners. There was the talk about this cooperative farming. So people will come under cooperative farming. Some people will gather together and they will introduce a cooperative model of farming, in agriculture. The last thing came in terms of productivity of the land. The land productivity is to be increased. So there will be more and more investment on the land in terms of bringing modern technologies, etc. like this. So it is widely talked about what happened ultimately out of that. It has shown majority of the studies starting from Daniel Thorner, Andy Thorner, and also the economist, a good number of sociologists, that downward mobility of the poor peasant, those who starting from the British period, those are not stopped even after the implementation of the land reform. That because land reform was not implemented in true spirit in most part of the country. That's why those were the vulnerable categories, they become downwardly mobilized. And out of the downward mobility, what they showed that downward mobility made more and more people to get concentrated as landless agricultural laborer, as tenant, and many of them got horizontally mobilized. That is, they mobilized from the rural to the urban areas as migrant laborer, and many of them joined the unorganized labor force in the urban areas. Now, if we look into the rural changing agrarian framework now, it is quite interesting that there have been phenomenal changes in the agrarian society. That is, we have found that there is a land reform. Simultaneously, mid-60s onward, the government of India introduced the agrarian reform, especially for the Green Revolution. The Green Revolution widely talking about introducing modern technology, the thresher, tractors, irrigation facilities, chemical fertilizers, and also give other kind of supports, that is institutional support to the cultivators to bring revolution in the land. So they identified certain parts of the country, that is northern part, it was Punjab, Haryana, Western UP, also some parts of South and Maharashtra it was identified in 1969. That was the Ford Foundation and Swaminathan, our famous agricultural scientist, they planned that, and out of this planning, what we found, enormous agricultural growth started taking place. Now, our per hectare cultivation output, agricultural outputs, those were only to the extent of 6 to 7 quintal per hectare. It increased by 1972-73 to the extent of 17 hectare. Now India produces to the extent of 26 quintal per hectare. So what we find, enormous proliferation of agricultural production. So India becomes total stakeholder, a victorious participant in the Green Revolution in the world. So we found two things. One is the agrarian reform, that is the land reform, and the Green Revolution. But what has happened in terms of landholding? Because it is when we are talking about the agrarian social structure, we are talking about the ownership, control, and management of the land. Landman ratio, that is when India got independence, our per household landholding was to the extent of 2.5 hectare per household. Now in 2011, it has reduced to the extent of only 0.4 hectare per household. It's an enormous decline of the landman ratio. And if we go in terms of per individual landholding, when India got independence, per individual landholding was to the extent of 0.5 hectare per person. Now it has declined to the extent of 0.9 hectare per person. So what we find, enormous decline in the landman ratio in the country, because number of the population has increased. When India got independence, 36 crores of population was living in the same space of land, and of the 36 crores of population, 91% of the people was dependent on agriculture. Now what we find, that is, number of the population has increased, that is to the extent of 125 crores. And what we find, land mass has not increased, though the productivity has increased, though simultaneously crops production from the land has increased, but the landman ratio has declined, because land gives the enormous inherent traditional security to the people. That base of getting security from the rural area, it has declined. Out of this increasing landman ratio, the second phenomenon has been casualization of the rural labor force. The casualization has taken place in three important ways. Number one, increase in the marginal workers. What are the marginal workers? Marginal workers are the people, those who don't get more than 180 days of work in the rural areas. Before 1991, only 9% of the rural household was the marginal workers. Now we find in 2011 that is roughly around 30% of the rural household has emerged to be the marginal workers. That means they are the workers, around 30% of the rural workers are not getting full employment in the rural areas. Second amount of marginalization is casualization is taking place, that is in terms of increasing landlessness in the rural areas. Now we find those who are the landless and the semi-landless, owning only to the extent of 0.04 hectare, their proportion to the rural population has increased to the extent of 40.2%. The enormous increase of this landless and semi-landless people. Now another important categorization of this, that is gradual eviction of the cultivators or replacement of the cultivators by agricultural laborers. Cultivators, those who are comprising more than 49% of our agricultural population, what we find, gradually their portion has declined to the extent of only 24%. They are the cultivators. But those who are the agricultural laborers, they are comprising to the extent of 19% of the rural labor force in 1981. Their proportion to the rural population has increased to the extent of 35%. So what we find, an enormous amount of casualization of the rural force. What casualization means? Three important things. No secured income. Number two, no livelihood security. Number three, declining social economic status in the society. Simultaneously, if we look into the rural society, though people living below the poverty line has declined in our country, till now 28% of the rural population living below the poverty line. Ultimately, what is happening out of this, we find that is gradually population shifting from rural to the urban areas. Now, as I told earlier, around 91 to 92% of our workforce in rural area was dependent on agriculture. Now it has declined to the extent of only 48%. Now 48% of our workforce in the rural areas are dependent on agriculture. Now what is happening if you come to the other area, that is what the rural population is going, where are they working? Now we find in the rural area itself, 45% of the rural workforce now dependent on non-agricultural occupation, either as a milkman, either as a thelawala, small businessman, or they are migrating from the rural to the urban areas as a migrant laborer. So what we find, the agrarian scenario, the agrarian framework, those who have emerged, it has made the lower section of the agrarian population more vulnerable in terms of their economic status. Social status, as I told already, they are the people has remained widely dependent on, rather widely encountered by the lower status in the society. Now, if we look into that, now we find there has been in the rural area a kind of a transformation in terms of the political arrangement of the society. What of the change, as I told earlier, in the rural area, we find that is widely affecting the agrarian social structure, that is changing political arrangement in the rural area. There has been assertion of the citizenship right and the democratic institution. Village Panchayat institution has emerged one of the powerful institution in the rural areas to be the flag bearer of citizenship rights of all sections of the rural population and all sections of the agrarian population. When we talk about the citizenship right, we talk about the right of equality, fraternity and justice, right to livelihood security, and also right to get a dignified existence in the society. Those citizenship rights widely enumerated in our constitution, that is part 3 of our constitution, widely talks about the very noble civil fundamental rights, the foundation of citizenship rights, and those citizenship rights are in the making and assertion in the rural areas with the interpenetration of so many other forces, other arrangement, institutional arrangement taking place in the society. What are those? Number 1, the local bodies, the Panchayati Raj institution. Even though there was the Panchayati Raj institution, the village panchayat, it started working from 1952 onwards. But it is only in 1982 the Panchayati Raj institution was made a statutory body. So it is a statutory body. Whatsoever decision is taking, it is to have some legal implication. It requires some kind of compliance on the part of other bodies, other institution, administrative institution in the country. So it is also another thing, that is Panchayati Raj institution also specified 30% reservation for the women in the Panchayati Raj institution seats. So next elections are held on the basis of 30% reservation for the women. So we find it is two important parts. One is that it is a legal statutory body. Second important part we are talking about in terms of reservation for women, scheduled caste and scheduled tribe. Now what has happened, important part is that when we are talking the agrarian society, this section of the population, the tribal population, scheduled caste population, the women working population, they form the chunk of the agrarian workforce. So they have got an instrument to assert for their rights in the rural areas. So that is widely affecting the agrarian social structure, the interrelationship between the agrarian population, the landowners, the tenants, the sharecroppers and the agricultural laborers. Now as I told earlier, there has been enormous proliferation of the non-agricultural activities in the rural areas. So what we find, it is simultaneously, agricultural population in rural India or in agrarian India is not totally dependent on one-to-one employer-employee relationship. What is that? Earlier they are dependent totally on landowners for getting employment, totally on landowners to get a piece of land to cultivate, totally on the landowners to be dependent on loan during the days of their calamities or any other exigencies or regular need. Now we find other kind of institution has taken place because they are working in other areas as a thelawala, maybe as time migrant workers, at time some other kind of self-employment. So there have a multiple employer-employee relationship. Though work has remained the same, keep in mind, though the work has remained the same, but the work relationship has undergone a phenomenal change. It has been widely contributed by with the arrival of new institutions in the society. What are those new institutions? The banking institution. Bank is helping the rural people to get loan and also other kind of supports. So the village panchayat office to giving them other kind of supports. So what we find, a kind of scenario which has emerged as an instrument for the empowerment of the rural people. Now whatsoever I have said, this is said, it may be appearing a kind of a sociological vocabulary of ideal type, but this phenomenon is taking place. A host of studies are conducted by the student of sociology across India. It shows that the agrarian social relationship is undergoing a phenomenal change, widely caused by number 1 migration, number 2 interpenetration of the so many other institutional arrangement, or also of the Panchayati Raj institution. There are aberrations, there may be some limitation, and those limitations needs further probing and inquiry. Similarly, we find the citizenship rights of the rural and agrarian people widely articulated through their representative, those who are representing in the state assembly and also in the parliament, because their voices are representing in the assembly and the parliament through their representative. So through the assertion of the citizenship right, the citizenship identity, they are in a position to speak for themselves through their representative. But Other part of the rural politics is that the agrarian politics is that intersectionality between the caste politics, regional politics, the communal politics with that of the religious politics. That is one of the phenomenon. There are several studies on the fractionalism in rural politics, caste in rural politics, religion in rural politics. We find that has widely taken place. M.N. Srinivasulu's famous doctrine of dominant caste widely talked about the dominant caste phenomena and the politics. What it told about in the rural area, and that is also quite relevant for the agrarian society. What it talked about in the rural area 1960s, 70s, there was the enormous proliferation of the dominant caste. Dominant caste, initially they are the people of the higher caste, and later on we find it is not only a higher caste, dominant peasant caste also came to these categories. They are the people, they are having the higher ritual status, and they got access to modern education, took the benefits of agrarian reform, took the benefits of green revolution, and started capturing the power, emerged to be more dominant section in the society. So what we find, there had been enormous emergence of dominant caste in some parts of the country. So that has also widely affected the caste, the nexus between the caste and politics in Indian society. If till now 68% of rural population, Indian population living in the rural areas, and caste is a determining factor in Indian politics. So that is a fact we have to reckon with, and that need to be recognition. Similarly, religion and politics that comes in. So what we find within this whole process, there has been the emergence of two important emergence. One is that penetration of state-sponsored initiatives and also civil society initiative. Those are widely influence the agrarian social structure, and it is important that student of sociology and general citizenry should know what are those rural development initiatives. Those are available or made available, and those widely affected the rural social framework, also the agrarian social framework. We can identify some of the program to talk a little bit. We are having the land reform program. It has altered the agrarian and the rural social structure. The Bhudan movement of 1951 and 60s, that is widely influenced the rural social structure. The community development program of 1952, it came in a big flow in 1952. That is, if the whole country is to be developed, the development should start from the community level. The community development program became one of this phenomenon, widely accepted, that is altered many of the pre-existing social relationship in agrarian society. Then Government of India started the National Extension Program 1952, the Panchayati Raj Program 1959, the Integrated Agricultural District Program 1960s, the High Yielding Variety Program started in 1965. Small Farmers Agency Program started also in 1969. Marginal Farmers and Agricultural Laborers Development Agency, that's an institutional arrangement to empower the marginal farmers and agricultural laborer. It came in 1969. Then we find the Integrated Rural Development Program that also spread in 1971. Then we find enormous programs are given specially meant for the employment generation, and those are the Rural Industrialization Program, the Crash Program for Rural Employment, Food for Work Program, National Rural Employment Program. Now we find that is now reinvented in another name. I'll come a little later to that. That is, we are talking about the Rural Landless Employment Guarantee Program, Jahar Rozgar Yojana, Employment Assurance Scheme, Jahar Gram Samriddhi Yojana. A similar kind of program is started proliferating in many parts of the country, and all those programs, keep in mind, these are not the program of the state government, this is the program of the central government. There are so many state government programs. So one of the program, Nobel program, the Antodaya program, it started from Rajasthan. Those were the poorest of the poor. So first those are to be targeted. So the target oriented program was accepted by many of the state. Similarly, we find the program that is Tribal Area Development Program, Tribal Development Program, Drought Prone Area Development Program, command area development program, desert area development program, integrated rural energy program. So these are the program widely meant for the various segment of the rural population. Then it came in 1971-72. This is 20-point program and revised 20-point program in 1975. Training of the rural youth for self-employment 1979. And now recently we find some of the very influential programs started for the rural infrastructure, rural employment, and also motivation and skill development of the rural youth. The Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana is one. Scheme for the fund for upgradation and regeneration of the traditional industries. That is one of the program widely accepted to rejuvenate the traditional industry in our society. Scheme for the promotion of innovation of the rural industry and entrepreneurship, and Pradhan Mantri Matsya Sampada Yojana, that is a program to improve the fisheries in our country. Then also we find Deen Dayal Upadhyay Gramin Kaushal Yojana. It is widely meant for the skill development among the rural youth. Then we find similarly a program for the Rashni, that is the skill development scheme for the tribal youth. National Rural Livelihood Mission is another scheme, and we find widely accepted, applauded across the globe, that is Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. That is another scheme widely now implemented in rural India. Now, what we find within this whole process with the penetration of all those programs, we find the rural area and the agrarian population, both the rural population in terms of their caste combination and the agrarian population in terms of their ownership, control and use of land, they have not remained an isolated category. They have been widely motivated to get engaged with varieties of economic activities in terms of one capacity and the choice. Now, have they got that capacity? That is what the crucial point, that is, have they got that capacity? Capacity means educational entitlement. Capacity means social network. Capacity means economic capital. Capacity means the social and the political connectivity through which they can convert their liability into a resource. For that, what is important is that education. We find that till now, the rate of employment, rate of education in rural area has remained quite low, and rate of skill development has been quite low. And for the improvising of that education, for improvising the capacity for self-employment, there have been varieties of this program, and those programs are widely implemented with the intervention of, number one, NGO, non-governmental agencies. Many of the non-governmental agencies working in the rural area, and these non-governmental agencies are trying to generate an amount of not only awareness, amount of consensitization of the rural population to be aware of their capabilities for self-employment, capabilities to be aware, capability to be not dependent, rather capability to assert their right in terms of equality, and also to stand firm in terms of their position in the society. So what we find that despite all those things, all those developmental initiative, constitutional provision and the reformative measures, the hard realities of inequality in the agrarian society is prevalent. What are those prevalent hard realities of the rural society and in general, an agrarian society in particular? Landlessness. That is one. Increasing landlessness has become a phenomenon. Illiteracy and lack of skill has been another phenomenon. Poverty, as I told, 28% of the rural population is live below the poverty line, and intersectionality in terms of caste, we will look into lower the position in the caste hierarchy, lower the position in the ethnic hierarchy, higher is the possibility of landlessness, higher is the possibility of illiteracy, higher is the possibility of poverty, higher is the possibility of unemployment, higher is the possibility of feudal domination, higher is the possibility of migration and uncertainty for the rural population. So what we find that also, despite all those noble state-sponsored initiative, we find a varieties of negative element have remained integrated, have remained embedded with the rural society, and processes are in the being, processes are initiated to break the barriers of those negativity, of those negative backward dimension of the agrarian society, that is the landlessness, illiteracy, poverty, unemployment. The question may come, that is, if there is no land, we can give more land. So what can be given? Actually, conventionally we have thought of, that is, perhaps the two sides of employment that is available only for the rural population. What are those two sides? One side is the land, another side is that industrialization. But if there is another side, another important side, the third important side, cultivation of the mind, the capability, the empowering ability of individual in the society, especially of the rural youth, giving them the proper education and training so that they can be the flag bearer of their own knowledge. It is through the cultivation of the mind, it is through the cultivation of their capability that they can be the true stakeholder of the emerging society, that is the emerging knowledge society in India. Through is the rural, is the agrarian population will not remain an agrarian population in agrarian terms. They will be an agrarian population in intellectual terms. They will give lot of innovation that may come in through their mind, through cultivation of their mind, and contribute to the national development. So whatsoever we find that enormous unemployment, poverty in rural area that is gradually brought in, those are migrated to the urban areas. How those are migrated? Because any migrant laborer coming from the rural to the urban areas, they are also bringing the rural poverty to the urban areas, rural uncertainty to the urban areas, rural backwardness to the urban areas. Because coming in the urban areas, overnight they can't be enlightened. There will be a generational cost, and there will be a lot of sufferings, a lot of livelihood insecurity. Many of them they are undergoing, and they undergo. They can be stopped, and those can be stopped only by empowering the rural sector, by giving the all capabilities that the rural and agrarian population deserve in their own rights as citizen of this country. Now, the third important part, we find that rural India, because of its deprivation, is encountering a lot of rural discontent, and those discontents are reflected in terms of what we find. The peasant movement, the agricultural laborer movement, the farmers movement, the scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, and other caste, other category movement. There have been assertion of the rights both from the radical means and also the institutionalized means. Now we find the Constitution of India has given wide framework to channelize on discontent, to speak for the discontent through institutionalized means, through the parliamentary procedure, through the democratic procedure, through the panchayat institution. So what we find, a process of assertion has taken place. That assertion has been a part of democratic culture in rural areas, and here we find a kind of assertion that is transforming our society to a new direction. So whatsoever we said so far, let us just summarize in brief. Number one, we have talked about the intersectionality between the rural and urban society. What is rural and what is agrarian? So what we try to do there, that is rural society and the agrarian society, these are interrelated societies. There are certain institutional arrangement. With this institutional arrangement, those societies are gradually getting transformed. While the rural society, immediate social groups are the caste, ethnicity, and religion. In the agrarian society, the rural groups are formed in terms of ownership, control, and management of land. So in terms of, that is earlier the ritual and the primordial category, here we find a category based on the land ownership. Then we find second part we have talked about in terms of nature of state intervention has taken place in terms of transformation of the rural area, nature of state intervention has taken place in term for the transformation of the agrarian population. So what we find, what have been the impact? Despite that, we have talked about rural area and the agrarian society has been hard pressed because of certain inequality and uncertainty. And then we talked about, because of inequality and uncertainty, there has been amount of discontent. And third, we talked about those discontent are institutional channelized for democratic assertion for a greater transformation in the agrarian society. Thank you very much for being with me. And should you have any question, you can write in the Facebook, and I'll be happy to give answer to all of your questions that you may be having in your mind. Thank you very much. Thank you for being with me.